these channels have on Arab public opinion that the Bush administration decided to do something about it. This is the result. A new Arab television network broadcasting from new state-of-the-art studios. Arab journalists from all over the world have come here to join a news department that says it's committed to fair, balanced, and objective reporting. Using Arabian horses as its signature, it's called Al-Hurra, which in Arabic means the free one. But the free one is not based in the Middle East. They broadcast from an office building in an industrial park in Springfield, Virginia, just 15 miles from Washington, D.C. Launched 3 months ago, Al-Hurra is financed by the United States government and is being promoted as an independent vehicle to improve America's image in the Arab world.
Our role is not to be a mouthpiece of the U.S. government. This is not our role.
Muwaffaq Harb, Al-Hurra's news director, was born in Lebanon, educated in the United States, and is now an American citizen.
America is my country of choice. After 9/11, I took it personal. I mean, these are two worlds that I love, both of them. And in my capacity as a journalist, as a broadcaster, I see the need in the Middle East for a media outlet to tell the truth and to provide information to that part of the world.
But you want to change America's image in the Middle East.
I look at it differently. I believe America's image in the Middle East is not bad, it's distorted.
According to Harb, a distorted image of America is being beamed by Arab satellite news channels to a potential audience of nearly 300 million Arabs. He wants them to switch channels to Al-Hurra.
Okay, so I'm going to pause there. So essentially, this is the new, or was the latest of propaganda broadcasters that the United States has been using. It still exists, Al-Hurra, but of course there are problems with its content and with how the Arab world has perceived it. In fact, as we'll see, it's been incredibly unsuccessful for reasons we'll talk about. So to continue here at about 5:40 of the news story on 60 Minutes, note in the previous clip that the broadcaster does what it does from Virginia in the United States. The journalists and the editors, etc., are not in the Middle East. So, in fact, when they're reporting about what's happening in the Middle East, they don't have firsthand knowledge. They simply rely on information that they get from a distance, which means that if you're a journalist and you're not involved from day to day in the culture, in the environment that you're reporting on, you tend to rely on official sources because you're not able to directly access your own sources, or you don't have a sense of the culture in terms of talking to people, everyday people on the street. So that itself is problematic in terms of that is the United States, being able to communicate a message which is understandable and makes sense to people in other parts of the world, such as, if we can use the transmission reception model again, we can term them B. Let's continue.
What's the difference between what you'll see on Al-Hurra and what you would see on the other Arab channels?
Accuracy of information, accurate information. And because of who is funding us, American taxpayers, we guarantee when we talk about American point of view or American policy, we'll make sure that that policy is presented clearly and in context.
We know American policies. We watch Bush and Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz and Condoleezza Rice every night on live TV.
Rami Houri is the executive editor of Beirut's The Daily Star, one of the most influential newspapers in the Middle East.
People just assume that people in the Middle East don't really get impartial news. I mean, this is simplistic and it's just wrong. It's the policy that we object to.
The policies Arabs object to the most are U.S. support for Israel and the occupation of Iraq by 135,000 U.S. troops. The United States routinely criticizes Arab coverage of these stories, particularly Al Jazeera, the most popular Arab television news network. It's especially critical of Al Jazeera's reporting of civilian casualties in Iraq.
What Al Jazeera is doing is vicious, inaccurate, and inexcusable.
With so much controversy surrounding Al Jazeera, we compared their broadcasts with Al Hurra's. Al Jazeera's promos highlight the difference and underscore the suffering the war in Iraq has caused. The words say Baghdad, a year under occupation. Al Jazeera's news reports emphasize chaos, instability, and civilian death and suffering at the hands of what are referred to as the occupiers or occupying forces, meaning the Americans. The terms used in the reports are not neutral. In a report from Fallujah, the Al Jazeera correspondent says that hundreds of families are fleeing after every home has become a potential target of American planes, and that the youth of the town are filling graves crowded with the bodies of martyrs. Al Hurra's coverage of the war in Iraq has been extensive, but the language Al Hurra uses and the emphasis and tone of its broadcasts are very different. In a recent report also on Fallujah, American forces are called just that, American forces, not occupiers. Their bombing of the town is described as targeting gunmen there, not civilians. While noting the death of civilians, including women and children, the Al Hurra report says the bombing was focused, precise, and accurate. It goes on to say that the coalition forces' stated objective is to prevent chaos and restore order in Fallujah. According to Muwafaq Harb, the difference in emphasis between the two networks is deliberate.
The main difference is it's not in what we are doing mainly, it's in what we are not doing. The others are there to incite, to mobilize. Our job and our function is to provide accurate information and to widen people's perspectives.
So let me note a couple of things here before we continue. There's a certain arrogance in Al Hurra A's broadcasting. The assumption is that B doesn't have accurate information, whereas the news editor that was featured said, yeah, we have plenty of information. This is nonsense. We don't have good journalism here. Al Jazeera, for example, is itself a journalistic satellite broadcaster, a news broadcaster for the most part, and it is concerned that it communicates things clearly to B from B's biased perspective, because we all have biases. So it does provide information that B requires and B values, especially because it interprets and conveys that information in ways that B can understand based on B's experiences, their biases, etc. Whereas Al Hurra, is communicating news based on the American perspective and giving the American perspective. But of course, the American perspective is biased from a Western American way of thinking about things. So it could be the same policy, the same issue that's being communicated, but the way that A communicates it, if A is Al Hurra, versus if A is, for example, Al Jazeera, which is a satellite broadcaster based in the Middle East, the way that they encode or explain a news story would be fundamentally different. And therefore, B would have a different take on things based on whether or not A is communicating using the same biases as B. So fundamentally, you see a problem here using our transmission reception model. Let me pause and get to another part of the video for you. Now we're at 10:30 of the news story. Here you see a gentleman named Ken Tomlinson, who was at the time, this is done in 2004, which was a year after the invasion of Iraq. And 2001, of course, was 9/11. This is Ken Tomlinson, who's the head of the Board of Broadcast Governors, which is a body which oversees most, not all, but most American propaganda stations, including Al Hurra. And note the way that he explains that the values that America is communicating through Al Hurra and its other propaganda vehicles, or maybe I should say strategic communication or soft power or public diplomacy vehicles, whatever you want to call them, how he thinks these are universal values. But I think we can question that assumption in the way that we've framed things using, again, the transmission reception model.
Chairman of the Broadcast Board of Governors, which runs Al Hurra. He says imparting those ideals is part of Al Hurra's mission and will change Arab journalism.
For the first time, a real and honest debate is going to occur for the people of the Middle East to watch and hear. And that will make all the difference.
It's just a massive wasted effort, in my view.
So the bottom line for you is that no matter what the American government puts on the air, unless American policy changes in the region, public sentiment will not change.
I think it's two things really that people object to. It's the policy itself, and it's also the manner in which the United States conducts that policy, ordering people around, threatening them, sending in armies to redraw the map of the region, this sort of predatory kind of attitude, a kind of Marlboro Man of Middle East diplomacy that we are constantly subjected to.
People in the Arab world are not focusing on issues that are most important to them, on what went wrong with this great society, which 400 years ago was ahead of the West. They should be asking those questions.
What gives us the right to preach to them about our values instead of letting them decide what values they would like to have?
These are universal values. These aren't our values. Minority rights, rights of women, freedom, democracy, free press. These are the values of civilization.
You don't think, as the administration does, that this new network can promote things like freedom, democracy, moderation in the region?
Oh, no, I don't think so at all. I think those are values that people here often aspire to, but they don't see them coming either through the barrel of American army guns or the lenses of American television cameras.
So again, it's not so much the information that's communicated, it's really how that information is interpreted, what biases are used to encode or organize that information, and how that information is interpreted by and using their biases. But furthermore, the policies are really the most important component here. It's not the flow of information, it's the experiences people have, the experiences on the ground, which conveys to people wariness or a reluctance or a resistance to the American version of reality, the reality that they're living through, what's been broadcast to them from Virginia. And it's bizarre, I think, to think that this was going to have a positive effect on public opinion in the Middle East. And of course, predictably, it didn't. And in fact, the favorability ratings of the United States went down as a result of not just this, but the